January 12, 1848, the new Illinois Congressman Abraham Lincoln gave a speech explaining his opposition to the Mexican-American War and his demand that President Polk produce evidence of his claim that Mexico constituted a threat. Lincoln said that Polk wanted, quote, to escape scrutiny by fixing the public gaze upon the exceeding brightness of military glory. You see where I'm going with this? Our third story tonight, Vice President-elect Biden taking on his predecessor for an unrepentant embrace of military glory. Cheney this week, of course, admitting one of the perks that historically make presidents rather than Congress prone to wage war, it gives them power. According to Cheney, absolute power.
If the president during war decides to do something to protect the country, is it legal?
In general proposition, I'd say yes.
Well, last night, Mr. Biden addressed Cheney's unconstitutional claim in a detour he took after he was asked about President Bush.
Well, I've known him a long time. It's presumptuous to feel sorry for another man, but I feel somewhat badly for him. I think the incident in Iraq was unfortunate. The guy throwing the shoes, it was just uncalled for. It was. I think that President Bush, unlike Vice President Cheney, is upon reflection beginning to acknowledge some of the serious, if not mistakes, misjudgments that he made.
In fact, while a new CNN poll finds that 64% of Americans consider Cheney a poor vice president, including 23% who pick him as worst ever, Cheney suggested that he has had the Constitution on his side.
There are bound to be debates and arguments from time to time and wrestling back and forth about what kind of authority is appropriate in any specific circumstance. But I think that what we've done has been totally consistent with what the Constitution provides for.
Well, as Think Progress quickly pointed out, at least one respected constitutional expert disagrees, namely the Supreme Court, ruling in June of 2004 that Bush and Cheney could not simply snatch up anyone it wanted without access to the courts under cover of calling them a suspected terrorist. And in June of this year, knocking down the Bush-Cheney ad hoc system of military justice as well as unjust. The warrantless wiretapping we first told you wasn't happening and then we're told was legal was found to be unconstitutional in a 2006 federal district court ruling. Other than that, then totally consistent with what the Constitution provides for. Well, joining us now is MSNBC political analyst Lawrence O'Donnell, who also is a contributor to Huffington Post. Thanks, Lawrence, for making time for us tonight.
Good to be with you, Cameron.
So the vice president also took a shot at Mr. Biden, saying it sounds as though Biden will have a less consequential role than he did. Can you talk to us about how history will portray Cheney's role? And also, on an emotional level, what for anyone else, Lawrence, would have been a personal, perhaps reflective farewell on friendly turf, his apparent utter lack of regret or even a glimpse of humanity. I mean, he chose 9/11 as the highlight of the presidency.
Well, he said 9/11 was the most important moment of the presidency, and I agree with that. I don't think there's any question about it. This is the only vice president in history who, in his office in the White House, had to get on the phone and ask the President of the United States for the authority to shoot down civilian airliners, and the President gave him that authority. This is the only vice president who had to be physically run out of his office because it wasn't safe. They believed it may be attacked that day, and that day changed both of those men. Now, there are people who've known Dick Cheney a long time who, a couple of years later, would say they didn't know who he was anymore. They didn't recognize the way he thought about things. And in terms of regret, Tamron, it's pretty rare to find politicians regretting things they've done in the past, from Dick Cheney to Ted Stevens or anybody else. There's two kinds of people in the world: the people who have things go wrong and look back at it and say, what did I do wrong? And the people who have things go wrong and immediately say, well, I did nothing wrong, it wasn't my fault. And that's kind of what we're dealing with in the Bush administration, is that, we did nothing wrong. And so the Supreme Court, as you pointed out, thinks differently, especially about the detainees. This is what they said this year in that 2008 case that you mentioned. The laws and Constitution are designed to survive and remain in force in extraordinary times. That is in direct contradiction to what the vice president has been saying.
Well, you named two categories of people there, Lawrence. Could there be a third category of politician who looks for any excuse to justify perhaps pointing to Cheney's claim of the constitutional endorsement for this administration's every act. Could that fall in a category of people who look for a manipulation of the law?
Well, yes, and not only that, but on, say, weapons of mass destruction. I mean, the Cheney shadow government. And by the way, what Biden is saying is simply, I will not run a shadow government out of the vice president's office. And that is indeed what happened during this administration, especially in the ramp up to Iraq. The Cheney team was unsatisfied with regular intelligence channels, and they kind of set up their own method of evaluating intelligence. They read it wrong, and they were absolutely certain that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Dick Cheney was absolutely certain that we would be, as he put it, welcomed as liberators in Iraq. And so, and he has yet to correct himself on that. He has yet to say, I regret constructing a plan that was based on the notion we would be welcomed as liberators. He has no regrets for that.
Well, Lawrence, speaking of notions, though, for the people at home who have not read the Constitution or who don't have it sitting right beside them near the bed as we speak, can you debunk the notion that the war is a presidential get-out-of-laws-free card?
Well, Anthony Kennedy did that in the Supreme Court's decision this year on the detainees. He said liberty and security can be reconciled, and in our system they are reconciled within the law. That is the principle that the vice president doesn't seem to understand. He seems to believe firmly that liberty and security cannot be reconciled in our system, that you must, at certain times, in extraordinary times, choose one over the other, and he chooses security over our traditional liberties. But this Supreme Court decision this year has very specifically said that is wrong. Our constitutional approach is exactly the opposite.
And you may have with that explained that third type of personality that may exist out there. All right, Lawrence O'Donnell of MSNBC and the Huffington Post. Thank you so much, Lawrence. Good to see you.
Thanks, Tamara.